He went on to say this: each of us has to decide what the right balance is between being effective and being honest. Now that says to me that the man is willing to be dishonest. And I'm somewhat amazed that he would state that publicly. I'm also somewhat surprised that the magazine would publish it. Maybe they did so in order to discredit that man. And so here he is admitting that they're putting up scary scenarios in order to have the American people follow their dictates that will lead to cutting back on our economy, cutting back on our productivity, and controlling the people of our country. Well, the global warming business and the greenhouse effect that goes along with it is a scary scenario, but it is not a fact. And it's politically incorrect not to say that it is fact. So the John Birch Society, being probably the most politically incorrect organization in our country, we're constantly telling people, here are the facts, never mind the scary scenarios and the unproved theories and hypotheses. Now let's move on to another subject. We hear a lot about carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide being one of the greenhouse gases that they tell us about. This is produced when we burn coal, oil, or natural gas. In addition to other gases, CO2 is produced, carbon dioxide. And the interesting thing about carbon dioxide is it's absolutely essential for life. Not so much for our life, but for all plant life. You can correctly state that we human beings eat oxygen and we give off carbon dioxide. All vegetation does just the opposite. It eats carbon dioxide and it gives off oxygen. And it's a wonderful balance in nature. And carbon dioxide is not bad. Carbon dioxide is good, because if there wasn't any carbon dioxide, there wouldn't be any vegetation. We wouldn't have any vegetables to eat. We wouldn't have fodder for the cattle and all of everything else that we like. We enjoy seeing a green forest or a green tree even, and they need carbon dioxide. Now, in order to demonstrate that carbon dioxide is not only not bad, but it is good, a team of scientists down in Arizona, led by a Dr. Sherwood Idso, I-D-S-O, performed an experiment that is ongoing, and they started about 6 years ago. What they did was they planted 2 sets of sour orange trees side by side, and they put plastic, an envelope around them, and they cut the top off the envelope. So both of them were shielded from the ambient atmosphere, and whatever was into them was going out the top. Now, in one set of the sour orange trees, Dr. Idso added 300 parts per million extra carbon dioxide. The other set, he simply pumped in whatever was the ambient atmosphere that day in Arizona. And after 5 years, he published the results of his test. And it's stunning. It's absolutely stunning to see what this man was able to demonstrate. The trees in the envelope that contained 300 parts per million more carbon dioxide were 3 times the size of the others, both above and below ground. The root structure was much larger. The leaves, the flowering, and so forth, the branches were 3 times larger than their counterparts. There was 10 times more fruit on the trees that had 300 parts per million of the extra carbon dioxide. And he also was able to demonstrate that those plants grown in the area where there was additional carbon dioxide used less water. And Dr. Idso's conclusion was, let's have plenty more carbon dioxide. And that's my conclusion as well. Carbon dioxide is not bad. Are there deleterious effects? Does it harm us? Does it harm you and me? No. As long as we don't live in a total carbon dioxide atmosphere, we have plenty of oxygen. And when you're adding 300 parts per million, it's negligible. It's not noticeable at all by you and by me. And so he says, let's burn some more coal. Let's burn some more fuel. Let's do this. And he started to protect the fact that more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would lead to greater vegetation, more vegetables, more food, more everything in the field of plant life. Now, Dr. Idso published all of his findings in a small book that he published privately, and it went mostly to the scientific community. But one copy obviously made its way back to Washington, and in the spring of 1992, Senator Albert Gore, who was chairing an environmental study group in the Congress of the United States, asked Dr. Rizzo to come to Washington, D.C., and Dr. Rizzo said, I don't need to come to Washington. You've got my results of my experiment, simply quote from the book, but the senator persuaded him and persisted, and so Dr. Rizzo went to Washington. And when he got there, he found out that they were trying to beat his story down. They were trying to get him to back up and admit that the results that he had really weren't so, and that there was something else involved in it and so forth. And he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't back down. And then they turned the questioning on him personally, and they began to attack him. Where did you get the money for your research? Where did you get the money for your book? Who's behind you? What's this all about? What's your real agenda? And so on. And Dr. Rizzo went home to Arizona visibly shaken by the treatment he received at the hands of our government in Washington, D.C. I happened to meet him shortly after he returned from that trip, and he was still visibly shaken about it. But the point that I want to make is that any scares that are being given to us about carbon dioxide are simply another one of Stephen Schneider's scary scenarios. What they intend to do because of scaring us regarding carbon dioxide is to stop the use of automobiles, stop industry, take controls, and they always talk about the fact that these problems transcend national borders, and so they work in the idea of destroying national sovereignty so that we have a super agency above all nations. They usually point to the United Nations to control what is going on in our country and in other countries. And it's a very dangerous thing. But carbon dioxide is not bad. Carbon dioxide is good, and it's not politically correct to say that, and I delight in being not politically correct. Let's talk about ozone depletion. I know that you've heard about it, and most Americans have heard about the depletion of the ozone layer above us. And the consequence of that is supposed to be, without this ozone layer above us, harmful radiation from the sun will impact the earth and will cause skin cancers in all of us and burn up a lot of other things as well. Well, what's the real story? That's very quickly the scenario that's being painted about ozone. Well, the real story has to be first explained with a little bit of chemistry. What is ozone? Ozone is oxygen O3. The oxygen that exists in the ambient atmosphere, the oxygen that we breathe, is a molecule made up of two atoms of oxygen. It exists normally as O2, two atoms of oxygen in an oxygen molecule. If you add a third to it, it becomes O3, and that's ozone. Ozone is produced when there's a lightning bolt. And you might have smelled it from time to time if you were near a lightning bolt. But it doesn't last very long because it's very unstable. And the O3 will quickly break down into O2, and the one O1 that's left over will grab onto something and form an oxide of it, be it an oxide of chlorine or an oxide of nitrogen or an oxide of something. Or it will grab another loose O1 hanging around and quickly combine and form another O2. Now that's very quickly an explanation of what ozone is. Now, the environmentalists claim that the ozone in the upper levels of the atmosphere is what does the blocking of the harmful radiation. And that's completely backwards. A competent scientist will explain to you that ozone is produced by the act of blocking accomplished by the oxygen. What happens is the harmful, and these are the short wave radiation waves that come from the sun. The harmful radiation is blocked by the oxygen. The oxygen O2 splits into O1 and O1. Many of those O1s grab onto a nearby O2 and become O3. And so if ozone exists in the upper atmosphere, then you know that radiation is impacting, and you know that nature is working. The ozone does not do the blocking. The ozone is the consequence of the blocking by the oxygen that exists in the upper atmosphere. And that's totally contrary to what's being told us. We are being told over and over again that we need this ozone up there to do the blocking. And the environmentalists are telling us that one of the problems that we have here is that the chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, that we produce and that we use in our our pressure cans of shaving cream or hairspray or anything else, and also the CFCs that are used in air conditioning. These are escaping, and they are rising into the stratosphere, into the upper levels of the atmosphere, and they are, the chlorine part of it is combining with the loose oxygen from the ozone and stealing it away and making oxygen and a nitrogen and a oxide of chlorine. And so therefore they say we have to ban chlorofluorocarbons. And they have already succeeded in banning them to a large degree. And now it's more expensive to run an air conditioner, and it's not as efficient as it was. And indeed, some scientists have pointed out it's not even as safe as it used to be, because the chlorofluorocarbons that were used in air conditioning are of no real problem to mankind. Now, this whole scare is going on all the time. A very recent article that I clipped out of the New York Times shows here that there is an increase in the ozone hole, and it is depleting above Antarctica. Now, the date of this is September of 1992. Ozone depletion over South Pole accelerates. Now, I've explained to you how ozone is produced and its effect of the blocking of the radiation of the sun. Now, we know that ozone levels will increase and decrease depending on the activity of the sun. If you study any of the physics about the sun, you know it's a giant ball of fire, but that occasionally there are tremendous bursts of fire that go out way into space. And when these are aimed at the Earth, that means that more solar activity, and so you will have more radiation hitting the upper atmosphere. You'll have the creation of more ozone when there are solar flares. And so depending on the time that you take a reading, you will get more or less ozone, which means that there's more or less radiation hitting the upper atmosphere. In order to have ozone produced, you have to have sunlight impacting the Earth. Now, what season of the year is it in the Antarctic region at the end of September? We live in the northern latitudes, and the end of September means that it's the end of summer here, isn't it? And it's the beginning of fall. We're heading towards winter when we have less sunlight. But they have just finished in Antarctica a period of no sunlight. Absolutely none. In the dead of winter, at the South Pole, there is no sunlight. In the dead of winter, which of course is a different time of the year in the North Pole, there is also no sunlight. How much ozone, therefore, will you detect over Antarctica at the end of winter? Very little. In fact, you might detect none. And this constant business of the fact that this hole over the Antarctica, the hole in the ozone layer, is growing is exactly what you should expect. And it is absolutely no reason for us to give up our national sovereignty, to cut back on the use of industrial uses of CFCs and so forth, and yet it's going on and on all the time. Now, I have a book that I think is very, very helpful in this, and I'll mention it here, and if I think of it, I'll probably mention it again. It's called Rational Readings on Environmental Concerns. And it's an 841-page book, and it contains articles written by prominent scientists, 80 of them, 80 articles in here, that have all been published elsewhere and then been collected into this one volume. There are articles in here by prominent scientists about global warming, about dioxin, about environmental economics, about acid rain, about asbestos, about ozone, about you name it, everything that's here. And some of the men whose names I already mentioned have written some of these articles. Hugh L. Sacer of the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories and Dr. Linzen from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It's a wonderful compendium of answers to all of these environmental scares. We certainly recommend it very highly. I would hope that your library might have it. It's available from Van Nostrand Reinhold Publishing Company, and we're just absolutely delighted to see that. We're always delighted to see when real experts come forward with facts to put down things that are really amounting to fiction. And so we see this ozone is another scare.